Good evening and a very warm welcome to the Anil Dharker Literature Live Independence Lecture 2025, presented by Godrej Industries Group and the NCPA. And to tell us more, I would like to invite our co-director, Amy Fernandez, to say a few words.
Welcome everyone to the Anil Dharker Literature Live Independence Lecture. It's our 13th this year. Those who knew Anil, and I think a lot of people in this room knew Anil well, know what a patriot he was when he established this lecture 13 years ago. The whole idea was to celebrate India in its myriad forms. He was also very clear that all our programs, all our events, whether it's the Mumbai Lit Fest, this event, the Lit Live evenings, all of them be free, accessible to all. It's what he wanted, and it's what we continue to do today. But we couldn't do this without the support of our partners, the NCPA and the Godrej Group. So thank you very much from all of us at Literature Live, including Quasar and myself. So this year's speaker is Santosh Desai. You know him as a columnist, as an author, you know him as an advertising guru, but what he has honed to perfection is his ability to explain the country's quirks without the trolls getting to us. And that's quite an achievement today. As a social commentator, he has been observing Indian habits, what we eat, what we buy, what we obsess and why, and he puts all of these observations together, laced with a lot of wry humor, which is what makes him one of the most widely read columnists today in India. In fact, there's a fan club right here that shares his columns the minute they're out. I know of some of them sitting here. So we're in for a wonderful time as he speaks about Brand India and what it stands for. In conversation with him is Shinjini Kumar. She's the co-founder of Salt, which has created a financial app for women. You can ask her about it a little later. And she's also an author in the making. Now, between the two, we're in for a wonderful evening. But before we call the speaker on stage, let's first wish our partner and friend, Nadir Godrej, Chairman and Managing Director, Godrej Industries, a very happy birthday as he comes on stage to say a few words.
Now, every flame has a sparker, and for Literature Live, it's Anil Dharker. The fest is now in its 16th year. For that, Anil deserves a cheer. Anil, alas, is now no more. But at this fest, he abides for sure. Anil was a man of many parts, master of sciences as well as arts. In an age of specialists, it is strange to find a person with such a range. No matter how hard you scan, you won't find such a Renaissance man. An expert in the field of salt and a connoisseur of single malt. In every art he excelled. At NFDC he propelled Indian film to critical acclaim. Directors he promoted made their name. Gandhi co-production added to his fame. He was an expert at the editorial game. His greatest legacy is Literature Live. We look to Amy to make it thrive, and all of us certainly ought to give it our utmost support. Anil and India's birthdays are the same, and Anil loved to play that game, but there was a tiny hitch. In Anil's mind, a major glitch. Anil was born in 46, something he just couldn't fix. He wasn't quite the midnight child. To this, he wasn't reconciled. But I say, Anil took the lead. He was the one who did precede. Hark, the herald angel sings. Independence is what it brings. Let us have a dual celebration, both Anil as well as his nation. This time we are celebrating later, But to my mind, it's even greater. Anil and India have their day. But this time, fortune came my way. My birthday we can celebrate. As it happens to fall on this date. Our speaker, Santosh Desai, stands at the intersection of culture and brands. He understands both very well, and from his writings, one can tell he understands cultural evolution, especially the technological revolution. As a writer, he deserves our cheers for City City Bang Bang's 20 years. Some of it summarized in his book. To learn more, do take a look. He observes life with the greatest care, but it's not detail that he'd like to share. The true essence is what he seeks. Of these true insights, he writes and speaks. He started off with traditional brands, but as he also understands both culture and technology, in his new venture, we clearly see the power unleashed when all three are combined holistically. At Think9 Technologies, great success is what one sees. 100 brands have been created, carefully nurtured and cultivated. Great success is what one can expect from digital brands with consumer connect. Tremendous turmoil has been unfurled in many parts of our troubled world. Can we escape the coming blight? Will our future still be bright? Santosh can provide us cultural insight. We are sure his speech will be a delight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Godrej. This is an annual feature, and we enjoy every year when we listen to your poem. Thank you so much. We have a message from Mr. Santok, Chairman, NCPA, who could not be with us today, but I'd like to read out his message to us. I am sorry to have missed the Anil Dharker Literature Live Independence Lecture, but a previous appointment before attending the SOI concert prevents me from coming. Anil was a dear friend, and his legacy is being suitably followed by the Literature Live team. I wish the series every success. Thank you, Mr. Santuk. Thank you. We now begin the lecture by Santosh Desai, followed by a conversation with Shinjini Kumar and a Q&A thereafter. So without further ado, may I invite our speaker, Mr. Santosh Desai, to deliver the Anil Dharker Literature Live Independence Lecture, What Does Brand India Stand For? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I have absolutely no idea how I'm going to follow that, Nadir. That was so stunning that I think that I can just give up and go home. Thank you so much. And happy birthday to you. Thank you also, Amy, for the wonderful, warm introduction. It is an absolute privilege for me to be here, given the fact particularly that it is in honor of Anil Dharker. Anil, my first exposure to him was like many people of my age, was through reading Debonair, for the articles, of course. But seriously, I mean, the magazine, in terms of the way it was written, was perhaps the most intelligent, the most open-minded of its kind at that time. And through the years, of course, I followed him. I had the great fortune of reading him all the time. And then being able to meet him personally through the ages of Lit Live. For many years, I have been both a speaker on occasion as well as part of the jury. And there was no question that apart from being one of India's finest minds, the kind of spirit of open-minded inquiry that he fostered was something that we didn't see, and increasingly has been so rare to see, not just in India, but in the world. I want to talk to you today about Brand India. When we talk about brand, and when we talk about Brand India, typically what is conjured up in our mind is its external sort of image in the world. We obsess about the fact that how does the world see us. It is extraordinarily important to us to be well regarded in the world. How we are perceived by investors, journalists, the diaspora. It's something that really seems to matter to us. And often that image provokes anxiety. Given the fact that things do go wrong in India often, Anytime that happens, there is always this question that goes around saying, what does this mean for brand India? Panicked calls from journalists saying that, is this going to affect India's image? Every time a major Western publication carries a negative article, again, there is this outrage that takes place. There is a sort of almost a defiant assertion that, they don't matter anymore, perhaps underlining just how much they do to us, at least. The irony is that while brand India is obsessed with its reflection in the mirror, it rarely pauses to ask as to what it looks like to itself. That is going to be the focus of what I'm going to talk to you about. Not specifically what it looks like to the outside world, but what brand India looks like in the mirror to ourselves. For a brand is not merely what the world sees, good or bad, fair or biased. A brand, to my mind, stripped of all marketing jargon, is simply a pattern of expectations. It is a system of meaning that coheres around a central organizing idea. It is formed through actions, big and small, voluntary and involuntary. We don't get to decide what our brand is. It is inferred from how we act over a period of time. Brands themselves have limited control, even in the commercial world, over how they are perceived. This becomes especially true for country brands when we talk about brand India. There are so many diffuse and diverse sources of brand meaning that it is almost impossible to sort of contain and control a central narrative of how we wish the country brand to be seen. So what does India mean to us? What is the lived experience of India? What patterns of meanings emerge from its choices, its instincts, its actions? I'm going to start by illustrating the idea of a brand by taking Gandhi as an example. Not as a leading contemporary or leading historical figure, but as a brand. We don't remember him for any one particular act, but because he represented a patterned way of being. His use of satyagraha, which is an extraordinary political innovation, which Richard Lenoy, I think it was, who called it weakness made perfect. The Dandi March, which was an act of non-violence, almost cinematically conceived in terms of the way it was imagined. The use of the fast as a mode of political leverage, it's almost moral leverage that was used by inflicting pain on yourself. You wish to create leverage in the other's actions. His insistence on cleaning toilets, his somewhat unsettling experiments with truth, where he used himself in an unflinching way to test out his theories, some of them perhaps legitimate, some of them a little more unsettling. But all of these together form a coherent idea. The idea that was exemplified by his being able to say that, when somebody asked him what was his message, and he said, my life is my message, which I think is, again, truly a remarkable thing to be able to say. That judge me not by what I say, but what I do. And that idea, perhaps, if one had to put words to it, was that of discovering extraordinary strength through the rigorous moral cleansing of the self. That perhaps was the central idea, around which there was a whole pattern of actions which we received, and therefore we perceive that to be Gandhian. When we talk about Gandhian, we know roughly what each of us is talking about. The question, of course, is that can a country as vast, as diverse, as layered as India ever be described through a single brand idea? Isn't that notion by itself ridiculous? Surely the experience of India for a Dalit woman weaver in Odisha is different from that of a stockbroker in Mumbai, or which is in turn is different from a techie in Bangalore. As it is for the faceless unemployed youth who finds a sense of identity being a Gaurakshak in Gwalior, and a Muslim family whose house has been bulldozed in UP. All of them experience India differently. Therefore, any singular description of India will necessarily be incomplete or distorted or both. And yet, there still seems to be a flicker of something we can loosely call Indianness that seems to unite this very diversity. At the structural level, there seems to be a common way we deal with our reality, with the way we accord priorities, the way we make choices. So if you would try and put a finger on this, what is then at the heart of brand India? For years, we have described this, that the idea of India lies in its ability to live with contradictions, to find a way that accommodates rather than resolves differences, where coexistence of innumerable realities becomes a way of life. Today, that feels a little hollow. For we seem to have found a capacity to emphasize differences, to consciously and deliberately deepen divides in order to drive various interests. Social media is full of many axes of division, outrage and hate, whether the issue is political, religious, or even it involves the choice of your favorite cricketers. All of them use the same language of disdain and hate. This is no longer the argumentative Indian, but the perpetually outraged one. So what then can define brand India today? To my mind, if I had to put words to it, what lies at the heart of brand India is our desire for progress without change. Or to put it more precisely, the search for outward advancement without fundamental internal transformation. The sensation of motion without dislocation. There is a passionate desire to move ahead, to be world-leading. But it is not accompanied by a corresponding desire to do what it takes to get there. India deals with the new in a very particular way. The new in India is not allowed to enter unhindered. Modernity in India has always been a form of negotiated tradition. The new never replaces the old expands to accommodate the new. The arranged marriage becomes the arranged love marriage, or even the love arranged marriage, where the couple falls in love, the parents pretend that that never happened and start all over again arranging the marriage. We have the electric diya that keeps up the pretense of the ritual while sacrificing its meaning. The idea of the akhand diya, which is supposed to be lit all night, is simply achieved by getting an electric diya, but with the important provision that the bulb looks like a wick of a lamp. So the problem is solved. Bhajans are sung to the tune of Hindi film songs. The other day at a Jagrata in my neighborhood in Gurgaon, I came across a song, bhajan Mata ke dil mein kya hai, which was sung to the tune of Choli ke piche kya hai. Perfectly normal in India. In our travels across India, interestingly, we came across this phenomenon, the unique phenomenon called bhai friends. These were quasi-boyfriends who serve as kind of defanged lifestyle accessories. Friends without benefits, in this case. The Indian way is to hollow out both tradition and modernity. In that sense, we are an equal opportunity offender. If the electric diya empties ritual of its meaning, the arranged love marriage takes a modern institution and makes it part of tradition. Hybrid solutions abound. Ideas that mash up the old and the new with an underlying intent, contriving to maintain a sense of continuity, to deny the idea of rupture and dislocation. There is a school in Delhi, in an area called R.K. Puram, which goes by the name of Convent of Rani Jhansi. I kid you not. So, convent is good, Rani Jhansi is good, slap them together, the Convent of Rani Jhansi. And this is true in all sorts of ways. You know, it's true in terms of food. You know, the famous example of the Makalu Tikki burger, where again we slap together, you know, things from both cultures in a seamless way. Pop culture, the way we have integrated influences from the West. Fashion. This is a pattern that we will see across this idea of modernity as negotiated tradition. Admittedly, this gives the culture great stability. It's an act of genius to be able to create and incorporate change without fundamentally getting changed yourself. We want a new lifestyle, but not a new way of life. We are able to guard against external influences which can be overwhelming, while not rejecting them. That is why we can never talk of modernizing India without simultaneously talking of Indianizing modernity. There is a story that in the introduction to Ashish Nandi's Return from Exile, told by Ziauddin Sardar, he says that, when the Aztecs were overrun by Christian invaders, the traditional Aztec priest was given a choice: convert to Christianity or die. And the Aztec priest chose death, which was seen to be honorable by everybody, including the invaders, who appreciated it. Yeah, that they are people of principle. He said that had the same thing happened in India, not only would the Hindu priests have converted to Christianity, but quickly composed a few hymns in the praise of Christ. But in a few years' time, the version of Christianity that they practiced would be revealed to be a minor variation of Hinduism. So that, in so many ways, has been the remarkable resilience and strength of this culture. This ability to absorb change rather than getting overrun and overwhelmed by it. At the same time, one must note that this is essentially a defensive posture, developed by a culture to resist change, or more accurately, to make adoption of change extremely selective and contingent upon its ability to become a version of its own past. That means structural change is very difficult in India. A new India can look vastly different, but it feels the same. Now, there is no denying that a lot has changed in India. Indeed, at one level, the India of today is unrecognizable from the India I grew up in. The roads, the gleaming airports, the malls, UPI and the ease of financial transactions, the ability to consume at will are all signs of a vibrant new India. Even socially, the new self-confidence we see in women as we travel across the country, the throbbing energy of small-town India, the blossoming of creative energy among the young, all point to significant change. There is a fierce desire for self-improvement, an aspiration to do a lot more, and many more avenues are open to the new generation. The mobile phone has been a tool of empowerment, a personalized instrument that reminds us every minute that we are individuals, we matter, and that we share a unique and two-way relationship with the outside world. So how fair is it to argue that India wants progress without change? It is true that the airports are dazzling, but step outside and chaos can still rule. T1 in Bombay, where we landed today, is a great example. The roads are new, as are the potholes that spring up on the heels of the inauguration. The cities are dwarfed by skyscrapers, which in turn are inundated by floods the moment it rains even a little. I live in Gurgaon, the so-called millennial city, where rain that would be considered a light drizzle in Mumbai gets our cars floating. Every winter, the air turns poisonous, but nothing changes. And the less said about our institutions, the better. Their decline has been steady for decades, but in recent years, the process has accelerated. The very instruments meant to deliver modern governance have been absorbed into the logic of society. The police act more as brokers of local disputes than as representatives of law. The parliament is dysfunctional, having been reduced to a theater of insincerity. Courts increasingly resemble panchayats, dispensing advice in the name of community sentiment rather than jurisprudence. The media, once an observer critic, now act as demented stormtroopers for the powerful. Even the Election Commission, once the safeguarder of democracy, now faces a real crisis of credibility. The bureaucracy too exemplifies this inversion. On paper, the great instrument of modern governance, in practice, an adjunct of society. Its rigidity paradoxically produces fluidity. So many rules exist that the only way forward is through discretion, which comes at a price. Because nothing is ever automatic, everything must be resecured, producing an air of perpetual contingency and distrust. It is as if the medicine has been infected by the disease. Every mechanism deployed to regulate society has become its instrument. Alongside this erosion, politics itself has become deeply personalized. Policy initiatives are framed not as systemic reforms, but as gifts. A gas cylinder, a loan waiver, a tap connection, new trains, welfare schemes, these are presented as the benevolence of leaders, not entitlements of citizenship. Even in a local sense, the nephew of an ex-corporator can wield enough clout so as to make himself immune to any law. Looking back at independence, we placed a sophisticated political framework on top of an entrenched social order. In the early decades, the post-independence elite held sway over politics, bureaucracy, media, and culture. Progressive ideals like secularism, equality, and institutional respect were not universally practiced or even believed in, but they set the default terms of public respectability. Views that ran counter to them but delegitimized and stayed largely private or local. As democracy became more representative and electoral competition intensified, that monopoly over the national narrative began to crack. The instincts of the broader social base, rooted in social order, caste, religion, and language, moved from the margins to the center. These identities were not new, but they now entered public life in their own voice, unvarnished and unapologetic. Hypocrisies were abandoned, as were standards. Digital technologies took this further by turning every individual into a broadcaster. Social media removed the last gatekeepers. It rewarded the primal over the measured, and in doing so, legitimized it. What was once whispered in coded terms is now shouted aloud, often to applause, because people discover that their views, however extreme, are not only shared but celebrated. Beyond the structural issue, there also seems to be deeper cultural issues at work. We excel at inherited order, caste, family tradition, where relationships are defined by birth and position. Here, our responsibility is to follow order, which we do rather well. But we struggle with constructed order. Traffic rules, queues, contracts, where legitimacy comes from impersonal agreement rather than inherited hierarchy. When we are asked to stand in a line or negotiate a roundabout, our instinct is not to comply but to subvert. Not because we are lawless, but because we don't recognize impersonal order as legitimate. We understand reciprocity, not rules. We need hierarchy to make sense of the world, and neither traffic nor queues represent hierarchy that we understand. Similarly, with our relationship with rules, instead of seeing them as guidelines to be respected, we often see them as a challenge to our individuality to be overcome. They are an affront to us, a kind of forced belonging to a system that otherwise does not see us. So we sidestep the rules, break them casually, or if we have the power, rig the system itself. And we fiercely protect the status that comes with hierarchy, sometimes in the most absurd ways. At many airports in the country, there is a board put up which outlines 32 kinds of dignitaries who are exempt from frisking. Although it has changed now, in an earlier version, among the categories, one read governors of states, and in brackets, it found it necessary to spell out not lieutenant governors, who we all know are very unreliable kind of creatures. We would all also be familiar with the massive billboards near toll booths that again outline those who are exempt from paying the lousy 100 rupees or whatever it takes to cross the toll booth. Now, what kind of a society is so invested in outlining who gets to break these small rules? What difference does it make if somebody gets frisked? How significant is 100 rupees or 150 rupees for somebody who's crossing the toll? But the idea that there are special people, that the idea of the VIP, and in India, the special category of the VVIP, is so important for us because hierarchy means so much. Strength in such a culture is often confused with the ability to get away with more. Whether it's on the road, where the powerful can run over people without consequence, on the international cricket stage, where the BCCI throws its weight around, strength becomes conflated with a sense of brutish entitlement. Strength confused with impunity explains much about contemporary India. We live by a paradox that looks like a contradiction, but is in fact part of a design. We are ritually collectivist and individually anarchic. Collectivism anchors us, anarchy frees us. Ritual order reassures us that the social hierarchy is intact, while everyday disorder gives us a sense of autonomy. The two together enable a world where formal institutions can remain weak because society supplies both the discipline and the escape. This is why so much of Indian modernity feels reactive. It is less a product of vision and more an accommodation of what the world sends our way. We practice a kind of inflation-adjusted change. We accept that change is inevitable, but treat it like rising prices, something to manage, absorb, and keep pace with, rather than to shape. By itself, society rarely seeks change. It is a culture waiting to be acted upon rather than acting. Change is imagined as a natural process arising elsewhere, which is then metabolized per our comfort. Consider the Mandal Commission. At one level, it was perhaps the strongest action taken to reorder social hierarchy since independence. And it did change things significantly. It brought new groups into public life, redistributed opportunity, altered the texture of politics. But even Mandal over time has been absorbed into the existing order. Its energy dissipated into the competitive arithmetic of electoral politics. The players changed, but the game remained the same. Stronger castes strove to muscle their way into the list, making reservations an extension of the very system it was trying to change. Mandal redistributed the access to the existing order without changing the order itself. The caste changed, the script remaining the same. Which is what makes society the invisible behemoth here. More powerful than religion, politics, or economics. It sets the emotional defaults, defines the terms of legitimacy, and decides what change is allowed to mean. Even religion, for all its apparent fervor, tends to act more as a cheerleader than as a regulator of society. We rarely modify our actions because of religion. Religion, on the other hand, legitimizes our worst instincts. It lends itself easily to social or political ends deployed in defense of whatever the societal imperative of the moment might be. It's very interesting that, just to illustrate how powerful the hold of society on India is, take the army as an institution and the culture that it breeds. Look at the cantonment as an area versus the rest of the city. Look at order there. Look at the maintenance of public utilities there. Look at the accomplishment of young women who are army daughters, who grow up in an environment free from the network of eyes that otherwise haunts women in India today. How they grow up without having a sense of limitations. Look at the ease with which religion is both acknowledged and yet respected in the army. And you find that by creating an alternative social ecosystem, it is possible to overcome a lot of what we think and what we take as granted as being the issues in Indian society. What is also interesting in India is that what the army does not escape is corruption. There is as much corruption in the army as anywhere. Perhaps because there, unlike the other instances where it can cocoon itself off, the army has to deal with the administrative network of the rest of India. And in doing so, it finds itself behaving like the rest of India. But it's interesting that it is possible. There is an alternative model where it is possible to create a little island where different rules apply. And here lies the great tension at the heart of modern India. The political opportunity lies in using society exactly as it is. Power comes from mobilizing existing identities, from deepening reciprocities, from reinforcing hierarchy rather than dismantling it. To win politically is to lean into society's instinctive design. But the development opportunity calls for the opposite. It demands that we overhaul these very instincts, make rules impersonal, make contracts reliable, make rights universal, make outcomes predictable, make institutions neutral. It calls for institutions that are stronger than relationships and a vision for equality that runs deeper than hierarchy. This is simply too difficult. Relinquishing control over institutions is politically unthinkable. Once you have control over these institutions, why would any political formation give up that lever that they have to continue to hold power? That is why politics and development so often part ways. The very logic that delivers political success undermines development progress. Every time politics bends institutions to social logic, society wins. But the promise of systemic change recedes. And every time development is attempted, it risks colliding with society's invisible boundaries. It is much easier and profitable to control institutions than it is to change society. The dilemma, of course, is that the very social structures that restrict us also provide value. What is oppressive is also often enabling. The mother-in-law may be the ogre in the domestic imagination, but she is also the one who looks after the child so that her bahu can go to work. The joint family constrains freedom, but it also spreads risks, shares resources, and gives the individual a buffer against the unpredictability of life. Caste discriminates, but it also delivers community and belonging. This is what makes change in India so difficult. To dismantle a structure is not simply to remove a restriction, it is also to take away a support. And because every structure has this double face, both stifling and sustaining, society clings to it. Reform is never simply reform, it always feels like a loss. This paradox has consequences not only for society but for the economy. We have been able to grow for years in spite of ourselves, riding on demographics, on cheap labor, on entrepreneurial energy that leaps over obstacles rather than clears them. But progress without change extracts a price. When institutions are weak and everything is negotiable, investment becomes riskier, contracts less reliable, outcomes less predictable. It is no accident that Indian markets remain shallow. Trust is scarce. Our bureaucracy, by keeping everything contingent, ensures that even economic certainty is provisional. What is cleared today might be blocked tomorrow. And only those who know how to navigate the maze can hope to succeed. Caste and community still shape access to opportunity. Land disputes drag on for decades, and the rule of law bends to power. This creates friction everywhere. A factory takes years to build, an idea takes years to scale, and only those with the right social or political capital can move quickly. Growth happens, but it remains uneven. Spectacular in some sectors, missing in others. We are trapped between sediment and flow. On some levels, India is unstoppable, a restless, surging flow. On others, it is immovable, weighed down by sediment that has been building for centuries. The sediment is an accumulation of habits, hierarchies, workarounds, and unwritten codes. It slows the flow, shapes its course, and ensures that movement happens without too much displacement. One could argue that this is a glass half full or half empty kind of a situation. Do we focus on the positives, which are undeniable, or on the negatives, which are inescapable? India has definitely changed for the better in so many ways. We are a large, complex nation. Are we being too hard on ourselves? Should we be more patient, more forgiving? It isn't as simple as that because there isn't an equivalence between the two. The positive resides on the surface, the negative is structural. India has cracked the algorithm for shielding itself and its society from the forces of transformation. Politics, which was meant to radically transform society, has instead been irrevocably transformed by it. You cannot make the developmental omelette without breaking the societal egg. But in India, we are reluctant to do so. The problem is that India now faces a world moving at technological speed, while we still change at cultural speed. We will modernize, but subversively, mincing our steps as we zigzag ahead, much like an auto rickshaw in a crowded bazaar. The journey to being a developed country is not about roads, airports, and malls. It is about the soft infrastructure of development, about an air of certainty and trust in people, in institutions, in professions, in knowing that the police will act regardless of who is involved, in knowing that the courts will decide impartially and quickly, that people will not drive on the wrong side of the road, that a new road will last 18 years, the average in developed countries, that one will not need a reference from someone important to get school admission, that doctors will not prescribe tests that are not needed, that the media will not concoct bizarre stories, that women will be safe being who they are, that access to healthcare and education will be widespread and of good quality, that breathing will not involve an act of courage. When systems take themselves seriously, people follow. The Delhi metro works flawlessly in spite of Delhi. Airport toilets remain clean because the system expects and delivers cleanliness. Immigration lines are largely orderly because the system believes in order. People rise to the level of order they experience. Blaming citizens for institutional failures misses this fundamental point. So what lies ahead? Is there a way forward? There are a few possibilities that exist as far as I can tell. One option that seems perhaps the most likely in some ways is that we are forced into change. That is something we are good at. Liberalization is a good example of that. Perhaps by technology, which is the likeliest candidate. Can AI create a system that overrides social mechanisms and create order? Can blockchain create trust of a new kind? Technology has one advantage. It works invisibly. It bypasses cultural barriers. A mobile phone makes us individuals not through its ideology, but through what its use enables. A touch screen gives us a sense of personal agency by its form. It responds to every small whisper of a command. Its responsiveness tells us that we are important, that we matter. Can AI bring about transformational change without being thwarted or tamed by society? However, it would be wise to be mindful of the power that society wields in India. The same technology that empowers women has also created the world's most powerful tool of social control, WhatsApp. Social media has helped entrench regressive ideas more than any previous technology, just as it has empowered people. And AI too could well have the opposite effect by deepening divides and creating a new sets of haves and have-nots. The other possible arc of transformation is that the current political dispensation finds a way to overcome its need for revenge and the othering of minorities and searches for a truly Indian mode of thought, one that seeks to find answers in complexity, that does not think of development as a zero-sum game, one that offers an alternative to the dominant Western modes of development, which are far from being perfect, one that distills the philosophical spirit of the past for use in the present rather than attempt a return to it. Again, this feels like a tenuous hope, with little evidence of it materializing into reality. If anything, we are moving in the opposite direction by trying to create a closed version of thinking, opposed to West on the surface, but mimicking its structure in reality. The famed Indian ability to accommodate differences is facing a challenge as we set out to literalize religion and harden boundaries. Alternatively, the pot boils over. The frustration of citizens translates into a political movement that forces change. After all, democracy has been the instrument of change in so many countries. It is not fanciful to believe that the same could happen here. In a democracy, this is the most viable path for change, if that is indeed what its citizens seek. But is that likely? We can have a different regime running things, but there is no promise of fundamental change. There are no political players that are invested in this kind of transformation. Everyone is playing within the implicit rules of this game. Without an alternative political imagination, change of this level, of this depth, does not seem possible. And today the system doesn't seem to provide adequate incentive for the same. The process of winning today's elections almost guarantees that fundamental change is off the table. It is worth remembering that there are two arcs along which change can occur. The ideological arc measures outcomes: poverty reduction, gender equality, Hindu pride, minority rights. The systemic arc measures processes, administrative freedom, insulation from consequences if one upholds the rules, separation of power from personal interest. The tragedy is that while politics obsesses about the ideological arc, the real revolution is needed in the systemic one. Unless processes themselves are reimagined and reinforced, ideological promises, however grand, collapse into rhetoric. And that is where no political formation in India today has either any vision or any incentive to move forwards. The responsibility shifts to the people to make this happen, to use the democratic system to demand change. Do we see that happening? Perhaps not immediately, but one can never underestimate how quickly grassroots movements crystallize and become transformative. Regardless of how the future pans out, one thing that seems clear is that India will not collapse. That is its superpower. It will always find its way. India is an impossible country where nothing is impossible. There is a resident wisdom at work that is deep, even profound. But it may not transform dramatically either, not in the way we imagine a developed nation rising. We will continue to drift upwards and forwards between the banks of improvement and improvisation, slowly bettering a lot while getting more frustrated as our desires outpace our appetite for change. As I move towards closing out this talk, I am reminded of Nietzsche's invoking of India as a mythical destination that the world moves towards, that is steeped in wisdom. He says, will it perhaps be said of us one day that we too, steering westward, hoped to reach an India, but that it was our fate to be wrecked against infinity? Here in the real, non-metaphorical India, are we looking elsewhere when we should be looking within? Perhaps there is an elusive wisdom that India represents, one that a single lifetime is insufficient to fully grasp. Perhaps 100 years from now, the countries that are the meteors today may have burnt out, consumed in the slipstream of their own velocity. We already see Trumpian America attempt to scroll over history in block letters with crayons. The developed world is riven by divisions that have emerged in part as a response to the speed of their development. In contrast, India's insight might well be that while progress might move at the speed of technology, sustainable change will follow the contours of geological time. Societies change far more slowly than technology or GDP numbers. Tomorrow's India may still be moving ahead in its own messy, conflicted way, wobbling, but still there, still charting its own course, still haggling with the future. Perhaps that's the real truth about brand India. Not incredible India, but perhaps inevitable India. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Desai, for a very incisive, rich socio-cultural analysis and a reality check. May I now invite Shinjini Kumar to be in conversation with Santosh Desai. Thank you.
What a pleasure it has been, Santosh, to hear your thoughts, and now to be sitting facing an audience that looks where you can't make out anything. I don't know how you delivered that brilliant talk.
It has been comforting because, I was terrified after, because all the illustrious speakers who have been speaking before me, and I was like quite scared to come here, but I can't see anybody, so it was very reassuring. I'm speaking to a void, it doesn't matter, how illustrious the audience is. So that was very helpful.
Okay, on the contrary, I came here thinking my friends will give me courage to have a conversation with you, and now I can't see anyone, so it works differently. But what a brilliant tapestry you wove of various ideas as well as realities and perceptions around the subject of India, not even just the brand India, but actually India today, and the things that we grapple with and don't find the right words to say it. You found the right words to say it because I could hear people in the audience relating to it. So what I'm going to do in the time that I have is to ask you a few questions that are that sort of go a little bit below that tapestry and pick a few specific threads. And then, of course, we will take questions from the audience, which can further illustrate the subject. But before that, I just want to make sure that everybody can hear me, even if I can't see you. Okay. Okay, that's good. So first of all, you talked about progress without change, which in some ways encapsulates our approach to modernity and to becoming the brand. I want to ask you one thing before we dig deeper into it. There is an essentialism about the notion of India, because where you ended with the Nietzsche quote, there is a sense of essence which, although with all this diversity, it's hard to capture in words, it's there, it's something. So if you were to point out three things that you would not change about that essence of the country as it stands for you, I would just want you to talk about it. And I don't know if everybody here has, or at least many people here would have read your book, which I did. And I think it's very interesting that you have a very, sort of a long love affair with the middle class and the way it has panned out. So tell me three things that you would not want changed.
No, I think one certainly is I think there is this almost innocent desire that people have for improving their own lives, and which you see across the board. You see this particularly in young women in the country, where there is this sense for the first time that they feel that there are avenues and options open to them. And while they tiptoe around tradition, they tiptoe around and they you know, around the fragile parts of male egos, you know, and all of that is part of what they do. But I think there is this essential belief in tomorrow, which I think is I think something that you see across the country. So that certainly I think is important. The other is, and this is, it can work both ways, but I think there is a contentment. There is an ability to find contentment, which is not necessarily always a good thing, but I think it I think is a very mature way of dealing with one's circumstances. The idea of acceptance of the fact that there is a certain reality, and that reality, how do you find happiness in whatever reality that you're presented with, the cards that you're dealt with. That at times becomes a block to sort of aspiration. But I think on the whole, that ability to find contentment, I think is something that I think is remarkable. The third, and even though its voice is getting drowned out, is that at an essential level, there is no desire to confront. There is a desire to accept, there is no desire to, in India, the acceptance has always been separate but accepted. You have no desire to mingle with forces, with communities that are not, that you don't sort of relate to. You're not trying to find and co-mingle with them, but you respect their difference and their separateness. I think that essential trait continues, regardless of the political winds of the day. So those are things I would not like to change.
Great. And at least you would not want it changed, even if there are forces at play that may want it changed, but that idea of the mutual respect and the unwillingness to forcefully engage or change is something which I think is great. And I think those are all three great answers. On the subject of young women, I must here make this, I think Amy talked about the book that I'm writing. And the book is about young women in Middle India who are making that change. And for me, a lot of people asked me, what did you find common between these 300 women that I met? And the answer usually that people speculate is something that you also mentioned about, support from husbands, support from joint families, capital from family, and various things, which are partially true as well. But to me, the thing that I really found common between these women was actually a great sense of humor. They could laugh at things that actually you should not be laughing at, but that's the only way they survive. So I think that's a great trait that we have. And so those are, I think, great answers. I wanted to ask you, I do want to go back to the idea of the brand as perceived from outside, because I know that we talked about the essence of being you, but then there's also a perception, and nowhere is it more obvious than in America of today, which continues to be the world's largest economy, which continues to have many inherent strengths, and yet just that one person with one great hairstyle can create such a brand change, right? So what is it that you think India, the brand of India today is?
Yeah, so I think India started out being by this brand, which was always this deep, timeless. India initially actually had no responsibility to be anything to the world. It was what it was. People came here, and if they wanted to engage with India, they would have to deal with its messiness. People in any case came to India not to find India, but to find themselves. Right? That was the timeless wisdom of India.
Yeah.
Then came this whole narrative of India changing. This rising new star on the firmament of the world. Rising economy, all markets, everybody rushing, the great gold rush into India. And there was this sense of this country waking up, things changing, excitement, new Silicon Valley, so that whole narrative. I think that exists, but I think it is now getting kind of, there is a certain tiredness, I think, that is creeping into that, in saying, yeah, yes, but not really realizing its full potential. Also, I think what has happened in the meantime is that India has perhaps tried to punch too much above its weight. I think there's an interesting article by this guy called Pranay Kotisthane from the Takshila Foundation, who argues that, if you're seeing what looks like India's isolation in the world today in terms of foreign relations, has a lot to do with the fact that India was in a sweet spot. It was in a sweet spot where it actually got along with pretty much everyone in the world. I mean, even China it was doing business with. It was not forced to align anywhere. It talked about strategic autonomy and was kind of, and it was big enough to be, so that you couldn't ignore it, and not strong enough to be a threat. And so if it kept its head down, it was in a great place. But internal compulsions of chest thumping and red eyes and all of the rest of it made India sort of, posture in a way that actually it got found out. And when you had this madman come in the US, who kind of, pretty much does, and unlike the others, he doesn't only speak, he does, right? And India is used, all diplomacy is used to people talking, but nothing much happening.
Yes.
But here's somebody who acts, and acts in bizarre ways. And nobody is prepared for this, but certainly India found itself totally sort of on the wrong side of everything, right? Because it was not, it was not important enough to be given the kind of, due that it wanted. So I think this idea, generally speaking in India, that India and Indians, in many ways, have overplayed their hand. I think that is the sense one gets from the world. And that it is, you've just postured more than, not that you're not important, not that that there is not an essential respect. Indians have done so well internationally. That continues to be true. But also now we have a whole lot of Indians becoming tourists elsewhere. You have Indians online, displaying all their amazing kind of, ability to sort of, talk nonsense of a most elevated kind. So all of this is feeding into this sense of saying that these people talk too much. They're not there yet. I think that is the sense that I'm picking up in terms of what is happening with India today.
True. And there is also a little bit of nuance there in terms of India versus Indians. So brand India versus brand Indian. Because the brand Indian still seems to play out in a different way slightly sometime, or is it the same? Like, would you have a comment on that?
No, I think there is a difference. And earlier the difference was very marked, I would say. I think what has happened is that there has been a decline in both, in brand India also, of late only. I'm not, and in the brand Indian, I think again because of a lot of the online kind of exposure that Indians, have, they in a variety of ways, physically and otherwise, there is that. But also I think there's a political angle to it with the coming of Vivek Ramaswamy, for instance, in the US. It unleashed, I think, a community that was so well respected. Yeah. Suddenly it became necessary to find ways to attack it. So I think there are more circumstantial kind of sort of factors involved. But I do think that the brand Indian has also taken a hit relatively. But it still certainly is a much stronger brand than brand India.
Sure. So I was laughing because somebody, all of us get so many forwards, and there was this recent forward which was quite long, first of all. I don't know who sits and watches those things, but it was a very long forward about Indians in America and how they are responsible for Silicon Valley and how they have built Silicon Valley, and without them Silicon Valley will collapse and there will be no innovation in America. But that's not the fun part. The fun part is that it was recorded by AI in the voice of Arnold Schwarzenegger. And so the video was filled with questions. Why is it that Mr. Trump does not like Indians in technology? And I said, why is it that you're using the voice of Arnold Schwarzenegger to talk about Indians? So yeah, so there's the brand India, there's brand Indian. And I want to ask you another question. I wrote a lot of notes in the dark, so I'm having a little bit of a struggle to find out. But you mentioned a very interesting paradigm about the army and cantonments and about the level of achievement in those limited areas to almost show by exception what the rest of India has not been able to get to. But also, if you really look at it, it's again the iteration of the same principles of hierarchy, in fact, in a much more coercive way than even outside. So it's a little bit of a bad problem becoming worse rather than better. Like, how would you think that is almost an achievement versus the chaos outside, which is chaos, but it is sort of less coercive? I don't know. I'm just trying to think.
It's a good question, and I'm not making a case for the culture, a militaristic culture in its entirety. I'm only trying to illustrate the fact that in a different setting where the social pressures are of a different kind, you will have a different outcome. I mean, I am not making a case for the fact that, there's a whole, there are many ridiculous things about the army. I mean, you have the whole army wives thing where the, officer's wife is one rank above the or whatever, and then all the other army wives have to pay deference to the senior officer's wife, etc. So there are, I mean, you have, that is hardly to say that you do not have, the army does not have its own, every culture will have its own kind of issues, what makes it work, what doesn't. I'm not making the case that we embrace and become militaristic like the army. That is not the case. I'm merely making that point that an alternative outcome is possible if we, and just to illustrate how much the external environment influences us and how powerful society is. The fact, and it is invisible. It just feels like, how much, I mean, it's easy to blame society, but is it really that powerful? It just to illustrate that, look at the difference in again, young girls. When you're not brought up in a way that everybody is saying, somebody's relative is saying something, you are taken away from the family environment and placed, and where you're changing schools every 2 years because you are getting transferred. There is a different reality and a different imagination in your head, and you see the world differently. It is simply to make the point that context matter, change context and outcomes will change.
Sure, and that's a fair point. But on the just to scratch a little bit more on the point of the cantonment, what has intrigued me, and in fact, while you were speaking about it, the fact that there is also corruption in the army. So it's not a space that is devoid of the problem that otherwise leads to your potholes and your broken infrastructure. So. Why do you think it's still?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question which I also alluded to. I think and that intrigued me also when I thought of the army as an example. And I think it has to do with the fact that the interaction there is with the administrative mechanism of the outside world. Whereas if you were to look at the other examples, that is a cultural space that you have control over that cultural space. Here you don't. You are always dealing with another body which works to societal rules, where there is temptation, where if there are vendors bidding for a certain project, then it's a two-sided thing, right? There is somebody saying, okay, can I influence this by offering X or Y or Z? And it therefore breeds a culture. Because you're in touch and your dealing is with the outside world, the impact of the outside world is much greater than it is when you create your own cocoon, where your rules, in a sense, are paramount.
Sure. So I have two more questions. If I have the time, I'll go through both. And my first question is about, you did talk a bit about what needs to change or what will change. And one of the things that I thought through in your conversation is institutions, because I picked up a lot about institutional weakness and how that has led to this societal, culture, or the difficulty of not being able to change. But there's a bit of this chicken and egg between the leadership and weak leaders and weak institutions, or strong leaders and weak institutions, and that combination thereof. So what do you think is, or the other thing is, you say people will change something because people can galvanize very fast around an idea. But we saw the Aam Aadmi Party movement coming up in that fashion, but eventually we know where it went. So I want you to talk a little bit about leadership, because it is a country of very bright people as well, and very, very successful leaders in the industry, in Silicon Valley, in various spheres. And why is it that in politics why is it that we are stuck in this situation where institutional weakness cannot be stemmed, because leadership tends to just give way very quickly?
No, I think that's a very real question. And what you posed as the chicken and egg problem, right, is the problem at the heart of it. I mean, let me take the example. Let me not take the current example. Let me take the example of Rajiv Gandhi. When he came in, I mean, I think there was this kind of a yearning, innocent hope at the time that he came to power. A young, fresh-faced, forward-looking person. And I think one of the best covers ever did, by India Today at the time when it still practiced journalism, was the changing face of Rajiv Gandhi. Just that cover. I think, to my mind, maybe the best cover done by a publication ever. Because you didn't need to say anything. From this open, fresh, innocent-faced, over a point, become very guarded, and jowled face, which is not just age, just, the becoming closed and becoming suspicious, it was all captured there, right? And I think that to me is a graphic illustration of this interaction that you spoke of. That you may, the paradox is that for any change to happen, because the system is not going to do that, you need a leader to do that. You need somebody to want to come and say, no, I'm going to change all of this. But that person has to operate through the system. And the moment you operate through the system, bit by bit by bit, it changes you. You could argue that that's what happened to Arvind Kejriwal. You could argue that if you were if you were sympathetic to that. If you were not, then it didn't matter in any case. But if you were sympathetic to Arvind Kejriwal, you would say that's what happened. Good intent, clear. But over a period of time, politics kind of makes everybody a politician, right? And I think that is the big dilemma. That is the reason why I'm not necessarily. And if you ask me, therefore, that is what is the concrete hope that one has, where change will come. And I struggle to find an answer. I struggle to find an answer because, you can hope for many things. But is there, in a realistic sense, if you have to say, I think that is the most likely way, I just hope, look at Donald Trump happened, right? The most bizarre, unlikely thing happened, and the world has changed. Who knows? We will have our own version, even more. I don't know. I don't know the answer.
No. I'll continue to place my bets on the young, optimistic girls and hope for something better. And okay, I'll ask my last question and then we'll open for the audience. And that has to do with something that you alluded to, but I don't think you got the time to talk more about it. And that is the structures of trust. Because that has a bearing on institutions, it has a bearing on society, it has a bearing on commerce. I remember when I was in university reading Fukuyama's book, and he talks about how different levels, structures of trust affect business outcomes in different societies. And the other day I was sitting with a friend, and maybe it was one of you, and she talked about her niece going on a date and asking ChatGPT about who she should be going with, and I thought that was bizarre. And she said, and then I asked her, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you ask me? I'm the cool aunt. And she said, because if I ask any of you, you will be biased. Because you think from the perspective of family and my interest, but if I ask this whatever Grok or ChatGPT, whatever she was using, she thinks it's unbiased, which it is not, because I work in technology, I know it's not unbiased. But I'm just telling you how people are transferring their trust in many ways. So let's talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think that's trust is one of the truly difficult questions of the day, because I think what has happened in the last few years is that we've destroyed virtually every source of meaning. And therefore the idea of trust. So earlier we trusted institutions, we trusted people. We believed that they were people and they had personal lives, they had personal interests, but when they played an institutional role, they were able to separate their own personal lives and their interests from the role that they were playing. That is the essence of any modern governance mechanism, that belief. That whoever is acting as a regulator is acting above board. There is that fundamental sense of assuming that above boardness. I think that over the years, we have punctured every institution, every individual is asked, are you getting paid to do this? Are you getting, so for instance, in my column, if I write something, oh, you're getting paid to do this, I am getting paid such a miserable amount that if I told you, you would donate to me, but it's that I'm not getting paid. This is what that I can believe this is impossible for people to accept, that if you don't believe in what I believe in, somebody must be paying you to say what you're saying, right? But at so many levels, we can't trust facts, we can't trust our eyes. Everything which we thought was evidence of the truth is compromised today.
Post-truth.
It is not. So therefore, I think that's the reason why it is so difficult. And so people talk about technology being, creating new kinds of trust. And there are new kinds of, it's not as if trust mechanisms, in their own little weak way, you have the community notes on Twitter, right? Which is a kind of, you have rating systems on when you buy products, but again, that is compromised, right?
Yeah, of course.
So this is like a arms race. that we are engaging in. You build trust systems, which they get compromised, you build a new trust system. But I think that is the biggest deficit in society today. And I think to reclaim trust is actually, if you look at globally, if there is one task that I think lies in front of us, is how do we recreate mechanisms of trust? Because I think that is the fundamental collapse that is underneath everything today.
Yeah. And because this also relates to your current work, and so because we are a very large population, we are a lot more vulnerable to this game of numbers, where, credibility has now become a function of larger numbers, and therefore we are a farm for the world to generate those numbers. And I remember in the early days of the call centers, we had a very different type of social problems of young people staying up at night, and that creating a certain type of social disturbance, so to say, in places like Gurgaon and others. And that sort of we learned how to accommodate that, and we got to this point. And today, because we are the largest social capital farm for the world, on very polarizing views or very sort of new product technology, everything, I sometimes feel we are more vulnerable. Like, nobody goes and targets one small country to create this kind of a narrative online. But we do get a lot more swayed by it. Look at whether it is online gaming. Of course, that's more of a domestic industry, but anything else. So obviously, in that environment, it probably becomes more difficult.
I think that's true. I think certainly because we are there is such a large number of very enthusiastic participants in this. So I do think that we become both a player and a victim of this. Because we are big players, because we are everywhere. Our voice is everywhere, and we don't hold back, right? On the other hand, because of that, there is also vulnerability. It is possible for that to get manipulated. It is possible for that to be used. So I think it works both ways. You're absolutely right.
Thank you again. Thank you, everyone.
This has been absolutely wonderful, and we have so many students here, so we've given them a lot of food for thought and what Brand India stands for. Thank you, Shinjini. Thank you, Santosh Desai. And thank you to each one of you for being here this evening. May I invite Amy and Kwasar on stage. A very big thank you to Godrej Industries Group and to NCPA. See you on the 7th of November at the Literature Live Mumbai Lit Fest. Thank you once again. Good night. Stay safe.